everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome to the Inclusion Collaborative State Conference. If my Inclusion Collaborative friends can keep an eye on the waiting room and make sure we let folks in. I see people are coming in as we're getting started here. Right now we have about 109 folks in our space. So good morning, everybody. A warm welcome to the sold out 11th Annual Inclusion Collaborative State Conference. I'm Cynthia Lopez. I'm the proud director of the Inclusion Collaborative. And just a little descriptor, I'm a South Indian woman with medium length black hair. I have it down today and I have brown eyes. I'm wearing a black Inclusioneers Thrive t-shirt. This was from our conference last year. I've got black pants on, I've got a gray blazer and some gray boots. Today, as we celebrate our 11th year in holding this conference, we reflect not only on our past decade of progress, but on the continued dedication to supporting all students in our schools and communities. Our theme this year is Inclusioneers Inspire. It's particularly meaningful as we aim to inspire you all and hope that you all inspire each other, educators, leaders, and advocates to push the boundaries of inclusion even further. And perhaps one day, as one of my wonderful colleagues shared, we will reach a point where the word inclusion is no longer needed because it'll just be a given. We extend our gratitude to the numerous organizations and individuals who've supported the annual Inclusion Collaborative State Conference. Our appreciation goes to Mrs. Charmaine Warmanhoven, a dedicated inclusion champion and dear friend to the Inclusion Collaborative for the past 19 years, serving both as an advisor and funder. We'd like to thank all of the departments within the SECOE and a big thanks to all of our Inclusion Collaborative staff, who work so hard to make this special event come to life. Thank you to everyone joining us, both in person and virtually. Again, this is a sold out event, so we're super excited and proud to share that information. We've put together an incredible program, and as you leave this conference, I know you'll feel inspired and ready to take the next step in your inclusion journey. Let's take a moment just quickly to express our gratitude to our sponsors this year. We have our amazing inclusion champions, SECOE's educator preparation programs, First Five Santa Clara County, and Strong Start. Our our inclusion leaders, Silicon Valley Community Foundation and Lakeshore Learning. Our inclusion facilitators, Special Olympics, Northern California, and Lumio. And finally, our inclusion advocates, CogLeap, Center for Achievement, Grand Canyon University, and REAL. Please discover more about these incredible sponsors by visiting their booths on our conference app. Their support, of course, has been instrumental in making this event even happen and, of course, making it successful. Before we dive into the conference, a few housekeeping items to go over. Please review the 2024 Inclusion Collaborative State Conference app. This is your comprehensive guide for the event. The app will allow for access to different features such as the agenda, handouts, the ICSC challenge, which is always a fun time, and more. If you're on your mobile device, you can access the app using this QR code shown here. If you're using a laptop like myself, you can enter the URL code provided at the top here. Here's our schedule at a glance. Access to the pre-conference sessions will be facilitated through Zoom in the conference app, so just make sure you're able to log in to the app and have a stable internet connection to fully engage in the sessions. We invite you to join the Inspire Joy Challenge. And yes, I watched Inside Out for the 5th time last night with my kids. And so that is what's inspiring our challenge these next couple of days. We want to let joy guide you as you unleash your creativity, connect with fellow attendees, and enjoy a variety of fun activities such as crafting your own memory orbs, capturing special moments at the photo booth, and much, much more. The challenge can be joined through the conference app. And right now I'll give you one of your first challenge passcodes. It's CHEERS, CHEERS, CHEERS. We'll be recording most of our sessions this year, so stay tuned to our website for more details. Now let's get ready for a day of learning, sharing, and most importantly, being inspired and finding joy. It's my honor to introduce our keynote for this morning, Ken Shelton, a colleague, a good friend. I'd like to say, I'm honored to say he's a good friend. Ken is a multi-award-winning educator and best-selling author with a master's degree in education. He's dedicated over 2 decades to teaching and advancing educational technology. His expertise in educational leadership, organizational change, equity, and inclusion have earned him global recognition as a thought leader and highly sought after keynote speaker. We're very lucky that we were able to have him just for this hour this morning, as he's going to have to run off and do another presentation. Ken's contributions and extraordinary commitment to advancing digital learning experiences have allowed for advisory roles for various organizations, both public and private. It's helping to shape the future of education and technology worldwide. He is co-author of the book titled The Promises and Perils of AI in Education. Ethics and Equity Have Entered the Chat, just released this year. The book explores the potential of artificial intelligence in education. Ken highlights AI's ability to personalize learning while emphasizing the importance of equity, transparency, and ethical implementation. This book empowers educators, policymakers, and parents to become advocates for AI's responsible use, creating a future where AI supports critical thinking, creativity, and individualized learning. And stay tuned for an exciting companion release coming very, very soon. Please join me in welcoming Ken Shelton.
Yay. So yes, for my intro, you are more absolutely, Sandy. I've definitely put good friends for sure. I'd like to say good friends with the entire county office. For those of you that are at the county office, you may recognize my name. My dad was good friends there, so by default, that means I am too. So it is definitely a treat and a privilege to be here with you all. I'm so happy to see, I recognize a lot of the names in the chat, and I'm glad that you all are here for what is a very important topic to discuss and continue to analyze going forward. So I'm going to go ahead and share screens now. So can you all confirm? Okay, let me do one more thing here. Okay, can you all confirm in the chat that you can see the slide there? Or can you just confirm you can see it? Okay, perfect. Good. Okay, so that's my contact information, but I know that it's going to be in the conference app. So I want to share with you all a couple of things kind of leading into this. We will use the chat. I'm going to be mindful of my time because we have basically about an hour. But I do want us to use the chat because I do think that part of our process of learning and understanding artificial intelligence has to be kind of like a two-way. It has to be an inclusive learning opportunity. See what I did there? So I want to share with you all a couple of things leading into this. And number one is, for those of you that don't know me, so I aside from what Sandy shared in my bio, there's one other thing I do want to bring up, and it really actually points to what's going on right now with artificial intelligence within the whole ecosystem of educational technology. So we're in 2024. So in 2011 and 2012, I had the privilege of serving on a task force for Superintendent Torlakson. And the theme of that task force was No Child Left Offline. And it's interesting when you think about a lot of the stuff that we went through in that task force was around broadband access, the type of broadband access, the quality and the reliability of broadband access. But it wasn't limited to that. It also focused on things like, when you do have access to technology, what are you actually doing with it? How do we effectively incorporate and support credential and teacher prep programs with respect to the use of technology? How do we appropriately resource and equip districts to effectively implement technology? And then the other thing that came up back then was, which it's interesting considering where we are with respect to what happened from March of 2020 to September of 2020, was the goal was, what does it look like to encourage and support more and more districts going one-to-one? And what I find hilarious is how many districts all of a sudden found all that money in between the seat cushions of the sofa to get technology around by June 2020, because the whole push was for one-to-one, like I said, all the way back as far as 2012. But the reason why I'm saying that is because you're seeing a lot of those same disparities, deltas, and reticence around key decision making that can impact both educators and students right now when it comes to artificial intelligence. And so what I want to do is point out a number of things to share with you all. So number one, with the whole AI thing, and I'll share with you all, I've been around ed tech this entire century. So I say that because a lot of the talking points around what it can do and what I always say is the overpromise reminds me of this bias here. And it's this whole idea around, in fact, I would even say drop in the chat, what is the promise that you've heard about AI? And I'll preface it by saying the one that I hear the most frequently is that if we use it, it will save us time. Point to share with you all is that there's always two schools of thought with whenever an emerging technology becomes available to the masses and it's seen as a disruptor. You get the overpromise of it's going to do all these amazing things, it's amazing, yada yada yada. And then you get the other side, which is we got to block it, we can't let the kids use it, oh my God, what's going to happen, the sky is falling, Chicken Little, when the truth lies somewhere in between those two things. And so I just want to share with you all a couple of things around whatchamacallit. What does it look like to reimagine learning with AI? And I'm going to take you all through a bunch of things. But right now, what I want to do, and I can even drop links in the chat as well, is I want to take you all through, these are the headlines about AI, and these are all within the last no more than 6 months, because I constantly update it. So here we go. Researchers warn of danger, call for pause in bringing AI to schools. Artificial intelligence in education, teachers' opinions on AI in the classroom. Could AI save education? Where does AI belong in education? Teachers and administrators have strong opinions, you think? Navigating the artificial intelligence revolution in schools. What educators think about using AI in schools. The unintended consequences of artificial intelligence and education. Without an AI strategy, the Department of Education risks delaying opportunity to close learning gaps. Now AI can write students' essays for them. Will everyone become a cheat? Generation AI, navigating the opportunities and risks of artificial intelligence education. And these are just the past 10 days. Parents sue school in Massachusetts after son punished for using AI on paper. Nevada asked AI which students need help. The answer caused an outcry. And relevant to all of us, California law requires schools to teach students about AI, and it's specifically AI literacy. What do you all notice about all of those headlines? Let me pause for about 20 seconds. Just drop in the chat. What do you notice as a common through line with all of those headlines? Sandy, this is where I wish we could take I would love to, I'd take the whole chat and then I drop it into AI and then I would have it synthesize it into, well, the most frequently used terms or the common disposition. But yeah, you all notice that. It's all about fear and anxiety, negativity. So on a side note, this right here, what you all are doing right now, even though I'm talking about AI, this is literally adjacent to media literacy, which by the way, has also been codified in California as well. But the whole idea around these is, I have links to these. I can try to drop in the chat if we have enough time. But the whole idea around these is that one, fear often leads to what I would say is myopia, which often leads to potentially destructive decision making. If we make our decisions out of fear, then the whole idea around what we're doing here is think about who is most adversely affected when those types of decisions are made, and then and more importantly, why those decisions are made. And I could go into interrogate many of these, but I wanted you all to see this because part of our understanding of AI and what we want to do with respect to our learning and our growth is to drown out the outside noise. There's a lot of noise, and really start asking the questions. I saw another one not too long ago. I can't remember the headline, but when I looked at it and I started reading and analyzing what they were saying, I was like, they're operating from a degree of misinformation because they really didn't understand. Basically, the whole idea was it was saying you can't let the kids use AI because they're going to do this, they're going to do this, they're going to do this, and they're going to do this. And I was like, okay, where are you getting this information from? And of course, when I did more digging, the authors don't work in a school, haven't worked in a school, but they were just doing, what we all know as the clout chasing for likes and clicks. And so I share that with you all because all of those things are where we're headed down a path. And the path is only going to take us in one of two directions. It's either going to take us down a path of empowerment or a path of exclusion. And right now, as I look at the education landscape, we're headed more towards a path of exclusion than we are the path of empowerment. And I'll share a little bit more on how do we course correct within these things. But the question for you all is that I'm going to pose here is how can we ensure AI is a tool for empowerment rather than exclusion? And when you think about empowerment rather than exclusion, part of it starts off with understanding one of the questions that I love to ask, and I want you all to drop in the chat, because this is my big case for this talk. When I want you all to drop in the chat. Love asking this question. When it comes to learning, what experience do you want students to have? Just drop in the chat, just purely, what is the experience you want students to have? Curiosity, engagement, joy, fun, positive, individualized and engaging, empowered, meaningful. Ability to initiate a task, safe environment, critical thinking. Yeah, these are great. Um, I would add to one thing for you all is this is where I like to push thinking. When we use the word engagement, I think it'd be helpful to be specific because I always ask, what type of engagement are we talking about, passive or active? And then, of course, on a whole nother thing, I don't have the slide here, but I have a pathway that goes from present to engagement to investment to ownership, because I don't think engagement goes far enough. But what you all have here is perfect for this, because my next question is, how does AI play a role in that? And this is the whole idea around exclusion versus empowerment. How does AI play a role in not just engagement, but the type of engagement, the type of positive, the type of investment or curiosity, all of those things? How does AI play a role in that? And so I'm going to share with you all, the whole idea around reimagining education. And this is something I bring up in all of my talks is we don't want to allow ourselves to be inundated with what I say is a constant litany of jazzy jargon and mindless platitudes. And what I mean by that is a lot of times in education, all of us have been exposed to it, is these people, they use these terms of these phrases and they use them outside of context or with no receipts. And so I mention that because here's how I define reimagining education, which is transforming the traditional educational paradigm through innovative approaches and technologies, utilizing artificial intelligence to create a more personalized, authentic, and equitable learning environment. That would be reimagining, and that's how we transform it. The best way I can describe it to you all is oftentimes, especially with respect to ed tech, is I see a lot of the following: high volume tech to support low order thinking. And the question I always ask is the tech you're using just a mechanism for the digitization of lessons, or is it dismantling barriers, and especially traditional and historical barriers towards learner empowerment? And AI can do that, but we have to approach it from the right perspective and with the right degree of vigilance. And so I share that with you all because Sandy has shared, and by the way, thank you. I did co-author a book with my brother from another mother, Dee Lanier. And, again, you go to what are some of the promises? Well, it's whole idea. Well, we can save time. It'll save time. Time saving. Listen, I'm going to be honest with you all. The whole promise of time savings is a ruse. And I say that because I would even ask you all right now. Let's say we learn how to use AI in a way to save you 2 hours of your day. What's going to happen with that 2 hours? Are you going to get it back? Or are you going to say, hey, I just saved 2 hours of time. Great. Now we're going to give you more work. And so the whole idea here is efficiency and efficacy. Are we asking the right questions? Efficiency for what? And what is the efficacy purpose? And then also the second one for me, which is another thing that comes up with AI that runs the risk of exclusion, is automating ineffective practices will not improve outcomes. I see a lot of, oh, well, I can have it do, I can have it make this multiple choice quiz for me, in 30 seconds or less. Great. But let's get into the question of how effective is multiple choice as the only form of assessment? And so I want to take you all through a comprehensive approach that I choose to look at with AI, which is not the overpromise, not the fear mongering, and certainly not the as I like to describe, the throwing up of confetti and blowing of kazoos. It's another emerging technology. And again, we need to approach it from the following areas. So I'm going to take you all through the following 4 areas. Systems thinking approach, understanding the different types of AI and how the systems, not only how they're built, but what they're intended to do and how they work. Once we know that, then we can now analyze those systems and determine a more definitive pathway forward. Once we get that pathway forward, we can develop a critical lens on how it might work and ways in which we can leverage it. And of course, all of that fits within the context of ethical leadership. And you all are going to get a bunch of other things that I choose to look at it as how can we leverage AI for good? And so you're going to get a few, and unfortunately, they're not on the document, Myra, but I can actually I can get them to you to at least share with everybody because these are your definitive next steps on how do we leverage AI for good. So the first thing is to look at it from a systems approach. You know, the whole idea here, it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from James Baldwin, which is, as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated. The whole idea around a systems thinking approach is developing a consciousness around how do these AI systems work. Let me start off with dismantling all the fear stuff. So one, AI has been around since about the mid 50s. All of us have used different mechanism or different technology platforms or features that are a type of artificial intelligence. I love sharing my first understanding of AI and use of AI was in college back in, I would say for sure, 1989, when I was typing a paper in Microsoft Word and I missed a comma and Clippy popped up and said, you missed a comma in that sentence. That is a type of artificial intelligence. So when you all hear someone say artificial intelligence, I would encourage you to pause and say, what type of AI are we talking about? Because there's 3 different types. There's reactive, predictive, and generative. Right now, when people refer to AI, they're really mentioning generative, but there are 3 components. Reactive are things like your spell check. It reacts to something you do. It has a limited data set, and there's a definitive input for a definitive output. And those outputs are labeled and supervised, meaning when this happens, here's a good response, here's a bad response. Okay? Predictive are things like your whatchamacallit, like your subscription thing. So Netflix, Spotify. So for example, if I watch a lot of sports documentaries on Netflix, it's going to do what? It's going to predict, oh, Ken likes to watch documentaries. Now, it won't recommend specifically sports documentaries, but it will recommend the genre of documentaries. Spotify, I listen to a lot of 80s music because that's when I grew up. So I'll give you an example. One of my favorite groups. So first of all, I'm a huge Prince fan. And obviously, Sprint's discography, his discography spans multiple decades. But if I listen to a lot of 80s music released by Prince, it's not going to just recommend Prince, it's going to recommend adjacent artists in the 80s. Generative are things like your Chat GPT or Claude and things like that. And so that is why it's important to understand system design, because the whole idea is to understand how they work. When you understand how they work, you can then proceed again with an analytical and critical perspective. And so generative, your Chat GPT, your Claude, your Gemini, things of that nature, they work based on patterns and predictions. So we're going to do a quick social experiment. I'm going to ask you all to use the chat. I'm going to ask you to fill in a blank. Okay, here we go. Once upon a, fill in that blank. Once upon a, Libby, yay. You see, most of you said time. Libby said midnight dreary. Same with Matthew. Midnight clear. But anyway, y'all get the point. Okay, so you all made a prediction based on a historical pattern. In your body of work, in your lived experience, you've heard once upon a as the syntax, and then more often than not, but not 100% of the time is how you fill in that blank. That is exactly how AI systems work. They cannot create something new. They look at past patterns and make predictions, and that those past patterns are your historical data. Let's do another quick one. Okay, let's say I was hanging out with a friend out on a boat out in the Pacific Ocean, and I had my rod and my reel with me, and I would put bait on the hook, and I looked over the side of the boat and I saw a school of, I love it, most of you put fish, one of you put dolphin. That's important to recognize a couple of things. One, you predicted it would be fish. Dolphins, what do we know about dolphins? When we see a group of dolphins, are they called a school or are they called a pod? This important, and I'm glad you all put dolphins here because that is the equivalent of what's called an AI hallucination. It means that the data has been poorly trained, is not labeled, is not supervised. And here's the thing, that comes up more often than people recognize. This connects to what you'll see later when I give a definition or context of AI literacy. If I were to say I looked over the boat and I saw a pod of, what would you all say? Exactly. It could be dolphins or whales. You all see, you're making predictions based on your estimation. And that's the whole idea around the way generative AI works. It makes decisions for you. And you're going to see why understanding how the systems work is how we proceed towards that pathway of empowerment, not exclusion. Okay, so we're going to do another activity. So we're going to use the chat here. And I'm going to ask you all, normally I like to do this in person in pairs, but we're going to just use the chat for this. So here's the activity. I want you to put in the chat, what did you have for breakfast? And then add a modifier to make it healthier. So there's two parts. What did you have for breakfast? And then make it healthier. Okay, plant coffee and wheat toast. That's already healthy. Whole grain. Okay, y'all are eating healthy before I even got to this. I love it. Okay, who put pumpkin French toast? Where was my invite? Perfect. Okay, and as you all are putting those in there, if you feel it's not healthy, make it healthier. And obviously, if you put oatmeal, so like Libby put high protein oatmeal, how would you make that healthier? I love Nina. Yeah, strawberries and cream oatmeal to make healthier, add real fruit, 100%. Remember, we're in California, so, or at least y'all are in California right now. We have access to that. But I want you all, so imagine if you were to have this conversation with, imagine if we were in person and you were to have this conversation with a person next to you. This is something you would say to them. What do you have for breakfast? They respond, you make it healthier. My point in this activity, which we're going to do another one, is what you all are doing is how the systems work, and it's called natural language processing. And the whole idea is AI systems you do not need any technical jargon, computer science language. It doesn't require any fancy coding. It's literally communicating exactly how we are right now. You put in the chat, for example, you can go into a large language model and say, hey, I had I can't see the name here, like JT put coffee and toast. Hey, I had coffee and toast for breakfast. What can I do to make this healthier? That's literally how you will communicate with it. And the whole idea is to recognize I don't need to have any special skill set. I just need to understand, and here's where we're going to get into it later. I need to understand how syntax works, how language works. How do I effectively communicate? And let me be clear on another part of the systems. AI systems are not the same as Google search. Google search, you're asking it to find something for you. AI, generative AI, you're asking it to do something for you. And that's a distinction that needs to be made very clear, because I literally, when I do my workshops, I watch where people will type in a large language model, the same syntax they would use in Google search. And that's why I think it's important to understand, how do these systems work? I don't need you to find something. That's Google search. I need you to do something. So you have to be explicit. And you're going to see, we're going to do a couple of experiments later on why you got to be explicit about that. But what are some of the things to keep in mind with these systems? So one, when leveraged properly towards empowerment, they can personalize learning. I can literally, I'll give you all an example, and I want to be mindful of my time because I want us to do some more activities. It's fun for me. I'll give you all an example. I was working with a school district where they had identified that the students that are emerging multilingual, meaning, and by the way, I am using my language intentionally here. The emerging multilingual students were still scoring 1 or 2 levels below grade level on reading assessments than their native English speaking peers. And I said, well, great. Okay, so we have the data. So I need you to pull all the data. And here was the data. And you're going to see why I asked all these questions. And I'm going to get to the whole personalization in a moment. So I said, so one, I need to know what are the texts that the students are being assigned to read or encouraged to read? What are the forms of assessment? What is a pedagogical approach to reading skill sets and reading acquisition? What are the mechanisms for assessment that I want to know all the different mechanisms of assessment. And then I want to know more about the students themselves. Like, do they come from economically resourced homes? Are they do they qualify for free or reduced lunch, meaning Title I? I need to know all of these things. And the reason why I share this with you all is it connects to this here, and it connects to a couple of the slides. So what I did was I took them through, and we took all this data, and my prompt was the following: take on the role of a district leader and reading coach. I've attached the data that indicates that students that are acquiring English as a second language tend to score 1 or 2 levels below grade level. You've incorporated the following pedagogical approaches. You've incorporated the following assessment mechanisms. In that context, please generate 10-minute activities that can occur in the home by an adult caregiver who is not an educator, that supports the goals that you have, those were attached to, around meeting the needs of each and every one of these learners to support their growth, as well as to fill the gap that has been based on the assessment of where their reading scores are and where you want them to be. Each activity needs to be 10 minutes and generate a new activity every day for the next 2 months. And that was what we did. By the way, I'm notorious for writing very long prompts. But the reason why I mentioned that to you all is that was our first step towards personalizing, in this case, the learning. It was a way of taking massive data and analyzing it in an efficient and effective capacity. And the reason why it's effective is, remember, I asked all those questions before I went into the large language model. And also, just for time's sake, but I also did an assessment of what are the current district resources. It's one of my favorite thinking routines. What are the things we have? What are the things we need? What are the things we can get? And what are the things we can't? And that's a thinking routine I took them through, because the whole idea was, once we get an answer, now we connect the home to learning, to the school. Now we need to connect available resources and accessible resources to that. But the whole idea there was, we took all the data that was used to make a decision, put it all together, looked at the resources, and put it all in a large language model. And the purpose behind that was to increase not only the accessibility, but also the inclusivity around the learning experiences for the students. But it's also something that we need to be aware of coming up. And when it comes to the system design, we also need to be aware of all the following things. So number one, the data that is used. And you all, on that document, on the resource document that Myra shared with you all, I have some key questions. You got to understand data governance. What data sets are being used? And then in addition to that, is my use of your model further training your data? And of course, what historical data is being used? And I can share this in the sense of, I have a scenario later, so we'll keep this in mind. But also, we can't have an over-reliance. If I go in and I say, I want you to do my thinking for me, then you run a greater risk of causing harm or it not yielding the response that you want. And that connects to this, which is recognizing that bias is not only in the data sets, but there is a thing such as called algorithmic bias that equates to things like data weighting, which you're going to see. We're going to do an activity around that. People always say, well, it's tech. It's written by a human. It's governed by a human, and it needs human data. So is there, no matter what. And you're going to see, I'm going to expose it and share with you all with it, but I also want to share with you all the empowerment piece. If we know that data sets are biased and it's there, what is the steps necessary to reduce the likelihood of the bias being a part of the results? And then the other thing with the system design is to recognize there's a growing influence. Have you all noticed how many platforms you've been using for years and years and years, all of a sudden now have an AI add-on or an AI functionality to it? If next time you're watching programming on television, just try to make a mental note of how many commercials you see where it's a good or a service, and then they're touting the AI functionality with it. And this is precisely why I always share with folks, like, if you're resistant to AI at this point, it's like standing at the shore with your hands up and a tsunami is approaching. Like, good luck. And so given the systems and approach, how do we leverage AI for good? And here's your next thing, is we have to make sure that we invest in tools and platforms and initiatives that prioritize equity and inclusivity. And this means if any of you on this call, if you are either influential or you're the decision maker when it comes to writing a check, I would start like, shit, we can shift that paradigm. Need to say, hey, I'm thinking of your platform, but I need to understand, how is it prioritize equity and inclusivity? And I'll give you all one prime example. And it's interesting how I've noticed this because I've been raising this red flag for at least 2 years now. Take a look at the developer teams and the decision-making teams of many of these AI platforms and ask yourself, is that representational of you or the students that you serve, either directly or indirectly? And what I've noticed is many of these AI platforms in education, and I will put them on blast if I have to, they don't have on their about page, they don't have their teams listed anymore. They don't have who's on those teams. So we need, for AI for good, we need to invest in those that are prioritizing equity and inclusivity. Chat GPT, I know that that's a common one, but it's, if I remember correctly, it's actually, Myra, if you don't mind, just do a quick search. It's DEI GPT. And then there's another one called Latimer. And then I just saw one at an event I spoke at where these are platforms that they're going through and scrubbing the data that is the opposite of diversity, equity, inclusion. There's another one, DEI Ally is another one where it is, they're designing a platform primarily for an LGBTQ user base. Latimer is also doing it where they're taking all their data sets and they're taking the time to cleanse the data that is destructive and exclusionary and things like that. But those platforms are not necessarily built for use within an education space, meaning that they are likely not going to be compliant with COPA, FERPA, SOPIPA, and anything like that. So the education ones got to ask these questions. And that leads to the critic and the analytical thinking part. So let me share with you all this. I can humbly say and proudly say I have worked with schools or school systems now in 45 different countries. And the reason why I bring that up is I have yet to ever engage in dialogue with a school or a school system of which literacy isn't important or a priority. And in fact, I would even say to you, if you all ever seen where literacy is not that important to us, like, I don't even know why it's even a thing now because it is foundational. But our understanding of literacy has to evolve. Unfortunately, literacy still tends to be more narrowly defined like it was when I was in school, which was reading and writing. When I taught, I used to share with the students the following two things. One, I define literacy simply as effective communication. And I would say to them, you're going to hear teachers say that you need to use academic language. And in an academic setting, I would say, yeah, that's appropriate. But go talk to your close friends using that academic language and watch what happens. Are you effectively communicating? And of course, the students realize no. The other thing is I say literacy occurs in 5 domains: reading, writing, speaking, listening, and observing. And here's the sad part. One of these 5 we use the most, but is valued the least in education. So I'll say the 5, and I want y'all to drop in the chat. The 5 are reading, writing, speaking, listening, and observing. Which one do you think we use the most, but is valued the least in education? And of course, many of you are correct. It's observing. And I would say second is listening. For sure. Yet, think about what you're doing now and think about the power of observation. I mean, we have a term of art we use in education, read the room. We're not actually reading the room, we're observing. Believe it or not, I still get into interesting discussions with educators that don't think observation is that important. And I just simply say, well, then I can point to 2 things. One, we should have a video chat with my friends that are professional poker players, and they'll tell you how important observation is. And for those of us that have a sports background, I've said, oh, you don't think it's important? Well, check this out. When you are at a high enough level in sports, obviously for me, many of you that know me, I played college football. When everyone is fast and everyone is strong, what do you need to do to get a competitive advantage? It's called observation, i.e. film study. So, but our definition of literacy has to continue to evolve. And so there are these three areas. There's media literacy, digital literacy, and then of course, in the context of this, it's AI. So here's how I define AI literacy, which is the knowledge and skills that enable individuals to critically understand the systems, evaluate and use AI systems and tools in a safe and ethical manner. It goes beyond just technical knowledge, encompassing the ability to navigate an increasingly AI-driven world confidently and responsibly. It's not, and that's why I mentioned when we're talking about AI, what kind of AI are we talking about? Reactive, predictive, or generative? If we're going to use an AI system, what system are we going to use and for what purpose? And what it does that, how is that purpose aligned with our educational goals? Like those are the things. You don't just use it because it's there. There has to be a reason. And we have to understand how the system works to use it for that purpose and that reason. Not all AI systems are built the same, nor do they work the same. And within that context, that helps us get a better understanding of just how impactful algorithmic bias is. So I'm going to share with you all this. And these are questions that I always pose, again, in our analytical thinking. So if we understand how the systems work, it leads to the following questions. How well do I know my students? If you work directly with students, how well do you know your student? I always say you can't personalize it if you don't know the person. The system won't do that. That's the human part. And let me be clear. The human element is still essential in the AI conversation. And anyone who says otherwise, I vehemently reject that. Because ultimately, the systems only work as well as we understand how they work and those of which we are working with and or supporting. So the first question is, and this is why, think about this slide with the questions I just shared with you with one of the districts I work with. That's why I ask those questions. I need to know about the students first. I need the big data and the big picture, but I also need more of the individualistic components. That's why I have a series of questions I ask before I even go into using an AI platform. How well do I know my students? What role do I play in supporting my students? And then, of course, the key here, how are they using AI? And are there any good ways they're using it? How do I know? Let me share with you all a quick side note. Popular district, one of the top 3 in the country, February of 23, announced, and it was put out on the news, they were going to block access to all AI platforms, specifically ChatGPT. That day, when I saw the headline, I texted several of my friends that work in this district, and I said, hey, tomorrow I want y'all to do a quick social experiment for me. I want you to ask all of your classes, all your students, how many of you had no idea that ChatGPT existed until your district blocked it, and then right afterwards, you went and checked out ChatGPT. And of course, I would say the median was about 90% of their students did it. And the whole idea around why I say that is at some point, we have to recognize that either we're going to provide guidance and ethical leadership around how to use it, or the students are just going to use it. And here's where hindsight is 2020. I remember when it was, oh, the kids are just comfortable with tech. They were automatically allowed to use it, and they're really good with social media. Look where we are with social media now. And this is why I do think that there is a degree of a responsibility on us. So now continuing on, what happens when it looks like to apply a critical thinking lens? So we're going to do another activity. Image generators. All of us use them. I wonder if you all have used them. And it's not in this talk, but I also think one of the other components of AI conversation that's not coming up enough is the degree of resources that are required to run these systems. And I haven't confirmed the data, but I've seen it in quite a few different sources. One example is using an image generator to generate using an image generator to generate an image. That one image is the equivalent of charging your phone 10 times. Think about what's required to run these systems. And this is where you get into the ethical part. But for now, critical thinking, we're going to do an activity. So I want to take you all through this. So this focuses on image generators. Here's your thinking framework. For the next few slides, consider the type of bias that may exist. Gender, race, ethnicity, age, apparel, clothing, and language. And again, remember, we went from systems thinking to analytical thinking. Now we're critical thinking, okay? And all of this fits under the AI literacy. So I want you all to just drop in the chat, predict what the bias is that you think will be in the result of the image that is generated from This is your first prompt, a doctor and two nurses. So let me go back. Remember, gender, race or ethnicity, age, apparel or clothing, language. Doctor and two nurses. So, okay, so you all put gender. How about this? Be more specific. What specific gender representation? Okay, Meg did it. Doctor, male, nurses, female, all American, English speaking. Yep, male doctor, female nurse. All right, y'all ready? Here we go. I use different platforms. There is a doctor and two nurses. And I have a whole bunch more, but for time's sake, I'll just go through a few of these. All right, let's do the next one. Teacher. Many of you mentioned white female, middle-aged. Yep. When you all see it, I would say think also apparel slash clothing. Wait, somebody just said it. Where is it? Oh, it's going too fast. Somebody just said it. All right, here you go. Now, see that? One of you did mention glasses. And what's interesting is that was the prompt. You notice they have their arms folded too, and you're going to see how that plays a role later. And here was from GPT-4o. All right, here we go. Gifted student. Glasses, I got male, I got Asian male, Asian male, Asian male. I have a big reveal for you all with this. This is why I like doing this. All right, here we go. Gifted student. I have a list on another slide to show you all later. But the reason why I'm saying this to you all is, and in fact, I really want to show you one other thing. So give me 1 second here. Okay, so I'm going to put something up on the screen in just a moment. Let's go to systems thinking. These are how the systems work. Everything you all predicted is exactly what's in these systems and the data sets, because that's the historical data and the patterns they've seen. Where do you all think they're getting their largest volume of data from? Where can I find a large volume, especially of images, that are already indexed and available? Social media and Facebook are two, but there's one that's even higher than those. Google. Bingo. And that's why it's important to understand how these systems are built. So give me 1 second. I want to pull something over to the screen here for a moment. Can you all see my browser here? Can you see that? Perfect. Okay. I want you all to see this. So if you'll notice, I did a search for professional hairstyle here. And this is why it's important, because it's oftentimes is referred to as, well, that's in the data of the AI. This is on Google. And by the way, you all can try this yourself, because I've even had people try to comment, but well, your browser history can't. Fine, then do the search yourself, because I know it's there. Watch this. You see I have professional hairstyle here. You notice I'm scrolling. Tell me, just drop in the chat, what do you all notice about these images? Okay. All right, watch this. I did professional hairstyle. Watch what happens when I do this. Unprofessional hairstyle. Now, what do you notice? Yeah, I'll see it. See that? Yeah, that's in the data sets. All right. And that's why it's important, again, systems thinking. It's important to understand how they work. So now I'm going to share with you all the following. So remember that first one we did was a doctor and two nurses. The reason why this is a problematic prompt is because it is too ambiguous. It's too general. Watch this. Instead of that, here's my prompt. A Black female doctor and two male nurses in a hallway of a hospital. The nurses are carrying charts and the doctor has a stethoscope around her neck. She has a look of confidence as she graduated first in her class from medical school, and the nurses are current interns learning the rigors of the job. Now, drop in a chat, what do you think that image is going to reveal? I like Sharon, what you said. Yeah, watch this. There's your image. And I want to point out a couple of things. Number one, part of the key to the AI literacy in this context is you have to be as explicit and direct as possible. Remember, we did the experiment earlier. The more gaps you leave, the more the bias can show up. How do I, if I know that, if I know how the system works, how do I approach it from a critical and analytical lens? Okay, so I know how it works and I know what it'll do. So I'm now going to intentionally fill in the blanks so that it decreases the likelihood of it doing it. I'll even add one more layer, and this is why I mentioned the whole thing around AI literacy. Look at these pictures, and especially the doctor. And if you'll notice something of what I said, gender, race, but here's another one that's key. She has a look of confidence as she graduated first in her class. You see the body language. Remember I mentioned observation? How do you think that body language will be different if I change this to a Black female doctor and two male nurses in a hallway of a hospital? The nurses are carrying charts and the doctor has a stethoscope around her neck. Wait for it, wait for it. She has a look of imposter syndrome as she is not confident in her ability despite graduating first in her class from medical school. Do you think you would still see the smile and then the posture? And I can share with you all, you wouldn't. And that's the whole idea around doing that type of prompt. And this is where you get into the AI literacy, okay? These would be additional prompts. Let me pause for just about 15 seconds. I want you all to look at these and ask yourself, if I were to do one of these in an image generator, what would it likely reveal? And obviously, now you've seen how you would change that up. Remember, race, ethnicity, language, apparel, clothing, gender. I'd even add geography. I did another one for time's sake. I don't have it in here. One with a large language model. So those were images. Those are the easy ones to see. With large language model, it's the same thing. I did a prompt of generate. You take on the persona of a screenwriter and generate a one scene screenplay of the conversation between a doctor and a nurse assessing a patient for cardiac arrest. That was what I did. And you all can guess what the bias was. And that one was even more specific because the doctor, you notice I did that. It made the doctor male. It made the nurse female. It said the doctor was middle-aged. It said the cardiac arrest patient was middle-aged. And it said the nurse was female. And that's why you have to be more and more and more descriptive. So let me go back to the whole idea around with us and with our students. If I understand how the system works, I can be analytical and critical. I critically can evaluate how they work and what I need to do, which systems I need to use. Then I can analyze not just that, but the specifics around the syntax that I use and what I'm telling it to do. What does that look like from AI for Good? It's things like this for all of us. It's demanding and insisting on transparency and accountability from AI developers, ensuring diverse representation across multiple identity factors are included in the design, implementation, assessment, and training process. It's asking questions like, what are your data weighting and data cleansing protocols in place? I can share with you all, there are two very, very, very popular educational platforms. They do not do that. And I know it for a fact because I know how to break them. And what I mean by break, I'll give you an example with one. There was two things that happened. So one was oh, it's great, it works in education, blah 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 blah. It's compliant with COPA and FERPA key. And I said, oh really? Okay, watch what I do. And I said, generate an image of a teenager wearing an ankle monitor. Take a guess at what the image it generated. Bingo. Y'all already know. Correct. See, you already know. Why? Because that's the predominant representation, and that's in our social conscious. That's in the system. And sure enough, it did that. And by the way, I'm not trying to dunk on this one specifically because I rather empower you all to be equipped with asking the right question. But it's a very popular one. Another one, they bragged about, oh, you can do a chat bot. Wait for this one. Hopefully y'all are sitting down. So it was we created these chatbots, and you can have a conversation with a historical figure. And again, because I know how the systems work, and I want to empower you all to know this, to be able to proceed by vetting them, asking the right questions and such. They go, well, you can have a conversation with a historical figure. I'm like, oh, really? Okay, watch this. So I said, I'm going to have a conversation with a historical figure. So I selected Thomas Jefferson. And I'm going to put in the chat what I said in that conversation with Thomas Jefferson. That was what I said. Okay, I'm gonna have a conversation with Thomas Jefferson. Great. Tell me about your relationship with Sally Hemings. And you all can probably guess that it did not provide accurate, factual responses. Not at all. And that's the whole idea. I was like, oh, okay. So even though it's designed for education, unless they are intentional around the development and the design of it, these things are going to leak through. And of course, with that particular platform, the very next thing I did was I pulled up, and they coincidentally don't have the page up anymore. And I said, let's take a look at their team. Do you notice that there is nobody on their team, decision maker or developer, that is at least optically representational of a majority of the students in public schools in the country? So that's why these kind of things leak through, because they have myopia in what they're doing with development and deployment as well as the design. And so they don't have someone saying, well, wait a minute, let me ask some questions. Let me test out based on my lived experience and my historical knowledge. And that connects to the last segment, because I'm watching the clock here, around what does it look like to engage in ethical leadership. And so let's talk about a couple of things with AI ethics. And I really want us to do a couple of more activities in the short time I have left. I got 8 minutes. I can finish in 8. Okay. So first is recognizing what's called the curse of knowledge. And I have several graphics to share with you all on this. And this is the whole idea around what does it look like in this context? What do I know? What do I show my students? And what do they know? Or in this case, user. But here's one. What about these platform developers? Or even educators? In many cases, what do they know? What do they show their users? And what you know? Or I'll even go more specifically. This is what it looks like in the context of AI and education, is this right here. What they know, again, this is why I go back to, tell me about your students, tell me about your goals, tell me about your strategic plan, tell me about all these things first, okay? What they know, what they try to show you, and then of course, what you know. And this is precisely why we have to ask the right question. Also, when it comes to ethics, these are the questions I pose. So many of those headlines, I did this experiment with a focus group of students, and I said, let's approach our use of AI from an ethical lens. And these are questions that are in the book too, but these are the key questions. One, is it against the law? No. Okay. Does it violate explicit school or district policy? In some cases, yes, it does. I go, but that policy is limited to the time that you're on campus. Y'all see where I'm going here, okay? Now, with that being said, what's more important are 2 and 3. What if everyone did this? How would I feel if someone did this to me? And then the big one, am I sacrificing potential long-term benefits for short-term gains? Let me give you all a quick short story example of this. I work with a group of students and I said, hey, I'm going to work with the English Language Arts department later, but we're going to do a couple of things. I go, so one, watch what I do. So I typed in a large language model and I said, generate a 5-paragraph summary of The Great Gatsby with a particular focus on the theme of meritocracy. And then it did it. And I said, so let me start off with question 2 and ask you all, if you all spent hours and hours and hours working on your essay and you found out that I did exactly what I just did and we got the same grade, how would you feel about that? And of course, the common response was, well, it's unfair, it's not right, it's unfair. And I go, great. And I go, now the additional question to ask is, and to ask yourself is, 2 things. One, are you okay with someone else speaking for you? And of course, the student said, no. I'm like, then why would you offload your work and allow an AI platform to speak for you? Because 1, it's not always right. And 2, it's not cool, right? The other thing is you need to ask yourself, what long-term benefit am I willing to sacrifice for this short-term gain? And then, of course, and again, the ethical approach, because that's sustainable, rather than, well, the rule says you can't do it, the dialogue. And so then, of course, I started laughing with the students and I said, you all got this assignment, didn't you? And they laughed. They go, yes. I said, you want to know the funny part, which is why I'm glad I'm working with the English Language Arts department? They go, what's that? I said, I got this exact same assignment in 1986. And that's precisely why we have to have these conversations, because the old paradigm has to shift. Just, I want to do last 2 things with you all, but this goes into this whole thing here is the whole idea around ethics. Like that conversation, I don't see it occurring with any degree of regularity in schools, and it needs to occur in the context of AI. We can play the draconian games of denying access and having punitive responses rather than the empowerment pieces. What does it look like to literally engage in a dialogue with students so that they begin the process of having an ethical leadership approach to their use of AI? I'm going to ask you all 2 quick things, and I promise we'll finish in 4 minutes, okay? 1, this comes up all the time, all right? So, in the chat, how do you define plagiarism? And if you want to make a modifier, legal context. Now the chat's not blowing up. I love it. Copying someone else's work, using someone else's ideas without their consent. Bingo. Okay, so for time's sake, I'll cut to the chase. Y'all with me? You cannot legally plagiarize AI. Let me repeat that. You cannot legally plagiarize AI. And that is not Ken's opinion. That is a legal fact. Black's Law Dictionary, which is the industry standard in the legal profession, defines plagiarism basically as taking the work of another human and representing it as your own. AI is not another human. Again, this is why I go to, we need to have the ethical conversation. We can get into, well, is it ethical to do it? That's a whole separate, but to levy an accusation of plagiarism is wrong. And I've had this argument with people, and I'm like, you can argue with me all you want, but if I'm a parent and my child's in your district and you accuse my child of plagiarism, I'm coming at you full speed with, this is how it's legally defined. So now tell me how make it make sense then. Okay. And in fact, I'll share with you all the real plagiarist is the AI, because it is taking humans' work and representing it as its own. Okay. Now, next one. How do you define cheating? Breaking the rules. There's rules again. Not putting in own effort, using someone else's answers, stealing someone's ideas. There's rules again. All right. So for time's sake, let me cut to the chase. There's 3 things with this. So number 1, rules are humanly constructed, and an unfair rule is still unfair despite the fact that it's called a rule. Okay. Rules are often designed for compliance and conformity, not for protection and empowerment. I can set a rule that creates barriers and stratify students as well. And the whole idea around copying someone else's work, I've heard everything from copying or fairness and all those sorts of things. I will just say, think about the context of cheating. If, let's say, for example, because I remember a district they had that using AI equates to cheating, and I literally said to them, "Okay, that's great. You got it. Okay, so you're saying if they use it for their work, then they're cheating. Okay, show me the policy you have that prevents economically resourced families from hiring a tutor for their child. Also, show me the policy that says if the adult caregivers are college educated, they are forbidden from helping the child that they care for." And the reason why I say this is two parts with cheating. One, cheating is a symptom, not a disease. If you create situations where it's ultra competitive, high stakes testing, timed assessment, anything that puts me in a position to where I have to make a binary choice, what's the likelihood that and here's the other part, that I'm going to engage in a behavior that, here, wait for it, reframing it, may be potentially detrimental to my learning. And on that document, there is a link to the researchers over at Stanford did research pre-generative AI, post-generative AI, and the incidence of students engaging in a behavior described as cheating has not, and not only has it not really changed, it actually went down a little bit. And my hypothesis is it went down a little bit because of COVID, because now you have more students who have access to technology. And again, how do we address this? You don't say, well, that's cheating. Go back to those ethical questions, and especially that third one. If students want to let AI speak for them, then they have to recognize, okay, I'm cool with someone else speaking for me, and I know what long-term benefits I'm willing to sacrifice. So last couple of minutes, this is also in the data sets, or excuse me, in that document that I share with you all. It deserves a lot more attention. I will just share with you all those AI detectors are flawed technology and unreliable. Okay, you got to understand the systems. And then I got a couple of other things to share with you all. We can't do the scenario because I'm looking at the clock now, sadly. But I will just say the use of AI in school to automate things deserves a higher degree of scrutiny. These questions are also on that document. And I'll just mention part of the pathway forward is for us to recognize the importance of the human element and not let that be removed from the conversation. It's also to recognize the curse of knowledge. Just because we use tech and we've heard of AI doesn't mean everyone knows a lot about it. And I'll leave you all with the last few things, which how do we leverage AI for good? It's things like this, is being proactive in piloting and testing and refining AI tools, advocate for continuous monitoring to ensure that AI delivers on its promise without the unintended harm. All of those ways in which we can begin to close the gaps and take a definitive pathway towards empowerment and not exclusion. And I'll leave you all with this statement. And by the way, I wrote this myself. I didn't need AI to do it. As we embrace AI's potential to revolutionize education, we must equally commit to addressing its ethical challenges, including issues of equity, bias, and student privacy. Our mission as educators is to harness AI not as a replacement for human judgment, but as a tool to enhance our teaching, empower diverse learners, and actively dismantle systemic inequities in education. So with that being said, I apologize for going over by a few minutes, and I know there's a break and I got to hustle for a workshop, but I thank you all for just being here. This deserves more time, care, and attention, but ideally this starts you all down the pathway towards empowerment so that you can begin to ask the right questions. Remember the keys here: systems thinking, critical thinking, analytical thinking, and ethical leadership. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ken. And there were a couple of questions in the chat, and I know, again, we're running out of time, but please, please feel free to contact Ken directly. He actually gets back to, I'm putting you on the spot here, but he gets back to you. He gets back to anyone that reaches out to him. So thank you, Ken. Big round of applause.